Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to the airwaves of Salam Media on this Wednesday evening. It is Talk with Inayat Wadi. And once again, our focus is in the Middle East this evening. And we are talking about the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And now what we are witnessing is the launch of a second front in Lebanon. Now, many analysts are actually saying that this is Netanyahu's plan to actually cling to power, and we need to gain a deeper understanding of what is playing out. And also this evening, we aim to unpack the potential of another genocide in Gaza. Many of us were horrified at the pager bombs that went to Lebanon as well, and what we've witnessed is there are a number of areas that have been evacuated, and once again, another humanitarian crisis that we will be talking about. But there are just so many issues that we'd like to talk about because there is now talk of a buffer zone in Lebanon, just as Netanyahu wanted in Gaza. But what Netanyahu actually fully understands that the Israeli mindset is a very, very difficult mindset in terms of achieving his military goals. We know there is a state of emergency. We know there is a lot of pressure that is within Israel with regard to the hostages as well. But with his failure in Gaza, his focus now has shifted to Lebanon, and apparently he is ready to pay a price in both Israeli lives and also looking at the economic decline. There are just so many issues that we can actually unpack as we head towards a year of this genocide that is unfolding in Gaza. But now, before we get to our guests this evening, what we are going to do is I want to play out a clip in terms of, and let's just listen to what Benjamin Netanyahu is saying to give context to this discussion with our panelists this evening.
With the click of a button, you can bring down nations to their knees very rapidly, if you so desire, and if you're willing to take the risks, because every system can be hacked. Our airplanes, our hospitals, our cars, our banks. Actually, the most important word here is our data banks. They can be hacked. And the possibilities of sabotage and worse are all there.
Well, that says quite a bit. With a click of a button, you can bring nations down to their knees. And tonight we're going to be unpacking Israel and the campaign of terror in Lebanon and in Gaza. We were due to get Marcy Winograd, activist at Code Pink, and hopefully we will still try and reach her. Unfortunately, my engineer is unable to get hold of her, but we do have with us this evening on the discussion Professor Sari Hanafi, head of Sociology at the University of Beirut, and Shabnam Palesa, Mohamed, journalist, activist, and lawyer. And we will be unpacking quite a bit of detail and also in the context of what Benjamin Netanyahu has said. On screen, we have both my guests, Shabnam Palesa, Mohamed. Assalamu alaikum to you, and also to you, Professor Sari Hanafi.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Wa alaikum salam.
Welcome. Shukran to both of you for coming on this evening, and hopefully we would try and still get hold of Marcy as well. But Professor Sari, we'd like to actually start off with you, and I just want to talk about this second front in this genocidal war that Benjamin Netanyahu has embarked upon, and now it is starting to impact severely on your part of the world in Lebanon.
Yes, actually, this is really a major escalation with Lebanon, with a lot of risk. But unfortunately, last week it was 2-3 actions blew the communication system, or undermining the communication system of Hezbollah, and that now the party is reorganizing itself. But as we see, the last 2 days, it was a kind of retaliation against the Israeli aggressions. Let me say that I always keep saying it's not only Netanyahu war cabinet. It's really is a change in the mentality of the Israelis. The majority of the Israelis are supporting this war cabinet, and with very messianic, radical, religious leaders inside, Ben Ghafir and others. So we are facing a tremendous, if you like, state and society who is ready to continue this genocidal war, not only in Gaza, but to complete it in Lebanon. We should remember what Galit, the Minister of Defense, said, that we will annihilate Lebanon. It means that it will be no anymore Lebanon on the globe. So all this is show this intention of continuing the genocide war to Lebanon.
Yes, Shabnam, let's just bring you into the discussion and just by way of introduction. And I know you've obviously been following developments very, very closely. We have been communicating from time to time as well in terms of your take and your analysis in unpacking what is taking place. And just, briefly an overview from your side on how the situation has now evolved over a period of time. 1 year later in Gaza, and now Lebanon being the focus of Netanyahu and his aggression.
Shukran, Inayat. Well, certainly we're seeing the actualization of the plan for Greater Israel, which Netanyahu and others have talked about for years, if not decades. And at the center of this colonization of the people of these lands that we see happening in the Middle East and other parts of our world is certainly corrupt corporations. Part of that agenda includes the Ben Gurion Canal. Now, we know that Israel has for a long time, and the US, been discussing plans to build a canal to rival the Suez for over 50 years. 20% of all trade moves through the Suez Canal, which is controlled by Egypt. The West does not want to rely on Egypt. And declassified documents reveal that the US Department of Energy was planning to take extreme measures to make this canal possible. In fact, in 1963, a plan was outlined to create the Israeli canal by detonating 520 underground nuclear explosions. And of course, 130 of the 160 miles are, according to them, virtually unpopulated desert wasteland. But the primary issue would be relocating the people in the Gaza Strip. And so the only way they have in their psychopathic minds to access this canal and access the gas that is in close proximity of Gaza is to commit a genocide, ethnic cleansing, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and displace those people. So that is certainly one of the primary objectives, being masked by the other Islamophobia, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab rhetoric. But it's all eventually and ultimately about the money. It's part of Greater Israel, and Israel, of course, being a bunker for the US war machine industry that has its grips in the Middle East, in Africa, and many parts of our world.
Yes, and also I think Professor Sari, just following up from what Shabnam is saying, and clearly there are future plans and there are goals, there are aims, there are ambitions that Israel has for a greater Middle East. But one needs to go back and just to put some historical context into what is happening as we speak right now. And we all know that, Hezbollah has been, there is no love lost between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah has always been seen as an enemy. It's always been seen as a target. We've seen it throughout the last year of the genocide that is unfolding in Gaza, where Hezbollah, their leadership, their command structure was being targeted repeatedly over and over again. And it's got now to the stage where it is blatant, it is open. We are talking about pager bombs. We are talking about unleashing Israeli terror in Lebanon. But again, one needs to understand some of the history behind this, particularly when it comes to Israel and how it views Hezbollah in particular and the greater Lebanon as well.
Thank you for your questions. Well, I can go back to 1948 and the expulsion of around 1 million Palestinians from their homeland and expelled to Lebanon, to Syria, to Egypt. And my family, one of them, I grew up in Palestinian refugee camps in Syria, for instance. But let me really focus in the last 30 years. And why 30 years? Because in 1993, almost 31 years, it was the famous Oslo peace process, where if you like, it was some hope. I have been visiting Palestinian territories in that time, and I saw that there is a dynamics that the Palestinian believe that it could be a division of land and two-state solutions, West Bank and Gaza for Palestinians and the other for the Israelis. However, just to give you examples about the major spoiling of the peace process was a settlement. The settlement in 1993, it was around 220,000 settlers in West Bank and Gaza Strip. If you like, this number increase in 7 years is almost tripled. Now we are talking about 4 times settler in West Bank. So this show that in fact Israel used a peace process as a way of pacifying Palestinians in order to continue a classical colonial practices in West Bank and Gaza. So this is why, of course, the locus of Gaza become the biggest prison in the world. I used to use even before 7 October as a ghetto. It's like Warsaw Ghetto in Poland. So if you like, this is why in 2000 I wrote an article which become famous, where I forged the concept of a spaciocyde. Israel is not really making mass killing of Palestinian as they are doing now, but simply making the land, the Palestinian land, unlivable for Palestinians. So this is spaciocyde, from space and side killing. And if you like, in 2008, I noticed, and on, we should remember that 2000 to 2005, it was heavy killing of Palestinians during the Second Intifada. But then the Second Intifada is over, and the ratio between Israeli casualties and Palestinian casualties is it was 1 to 21. So it means that really Israel was always a mass killing of the Palestinians. And this is why is no anymore this colonial project in West Bank and Gaza has any justification or legitimacy from international neither law or international community, if you like, mindset. So this is where Israel becomes so violent and move from practicing spaciocyde to a genocide. This is just to give you examples. In the last year before 7 October, it means from 7 October 2022 to 2023, you have exactly 23 times more Palestinian killed than Israelis. So, so this show that in fact this you have around 2,300 Palestinian killed during the last year. So this is why we should understand this sheer colonial violence. This really convince Hamas and the Palestinian resistance in general that they cannot continue like this. I mean, with a heavy international community silence and normalization of Israeli business and recognition of Israel, including in some Arab countries and Muslim majority countries. This is why it was 7 October. It was really a game changer for Palestinians. Now, I should really make it clear that I am also not very happy about the reaction of many Arab and Muslim majority countries concerning this what happened, the genocide in Gaza. And Iran, of course, is financing Houthi in Yemen, Hamas and Hezbollah, but in the same time, it's low profile now. It's really intriguing for me, and I feel that Israel is going to really to attrition war until making Hezbollah very tired from this situation. So this is really what is going on now. That in the same time we have amazing free world students movement, amazing South Africa, how they constitute the file for ICG and ICC, Chile, some Latin American country, Brazil. So we have some really amazing surprise, but I would say the biggest surprise is the complicity of international community, whether the European, the Western European, American, and I would say Japan. Look to how the Japanese vote in the UN instance. So it's really it's a very alarming what is going on. This kind of legitimization of a TV a genocide, which is we are witnessing and watching graphically in our TV every day. So this is really how is astonishing for me.
Yes, thank you for that, Professor Shabnam. Just to bring you back into the discussion, and also listening to what Professor Sari Hanafi is saying, we know at this point in time, the Arab world obviously impotent to a large extent, and also basically we've seen Hamas left on its own, apart from Hezbollah and also the Houthis in Yemen that have supported. But it is clear that when this genocide had started in Gaza, we always made the point that this is going to have huge implications right across the entire world. In fact, what is happening in Gaza will be defining what a new world order will be looking like. And I know, Shabnam, you like to touch from a South African perspective as well, and to look at it in a South African context in terms of how this will impact or may impact on South Africa. But also at the same time, we've seen on the part of Netanyahu, the clip that we had played out, one click of a button, you can bring nations down, just see the arrogance. And also at the same time, sending a very, very strong message that there are no red lines. There are no lines to be drawn. We will act with impunity. We will do whatever we want to. We've seen it with regard to the pager attacks, and then came the Israeli airstrikes. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people. Now we've seen this exodus that has been triggered as a result of what is taking place in Lebanon, very, very much same as far as what is played out in Gaza in terms of modus operandi as well. And again, we need to make absolutely sure that that agenda that you speak about, the future plan for the greater Middle East, will come to fruition in the absence of the powers that be around the world, and also the United Nations, the position that they have taken at this point in time. So there's just so much in all of this to unpack, Shabnam.
Thanks, Inayat. I'll talk about warfare first, and then I'll talk about South Africa, and I'll come back in the next round to the United Nations and the New World Order. Now, if we look at the money that, and this is what I said in my last response, I want to just touch on it or start there again. If we look at the money that weapons companies made in 2023, at least 5% more than the previous years. 5 of the top 6 global defense corporations, being Lockheed Martin, RTX, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and General Dynamics, all of them sell weapons that fuel conflict and harm people. So they have an interest in unending conflict and took an astounding $196 billion in military-related revenue in 2022. So they're obviously pulling the strings of the politicians that they and AIPAC, same thing, revolving door fund in the US and their accomplices generally in the North and the West, but certainly they are captured political figures in the South and the East as well. So we want to acknowledge that. And so it's important to always follow the money and who is benefiting from these crimes against humanity. From there, I'd like to talk about South Africa. So you might remember, Inayat, that Israel had purchased 550 tons of uranium from apartheid South Africa for its own nuclear plant in Dimona. In exchange, Israel allegedly supplied South Africa with nuclear weapons, design information, and nuclear materials to increase the power of nuclear warheads. Now, Klaus Schwab, who is the veritable head of the World Economic Forum, essentially a club for the parasite class, his family was involved in facilitating nuclear weapons to apartheid South Africa. So indeed, this 1% is psychopathic on an exponential level. And then closer to where we are now, Al Jazeera reported in 2015 that in 2010, a Mossad Secret Service document leaked to the investigative unit at Al Jazeera revealed that Israel obtained stolen South African anti-tank missile technology, and South African intelligence covered it up. Years later, when 2 men charged with stealing the plans were put on trial in South Africa, prosecutors failed to release the full information of Israel's involvement. And I believe your producer has the link to this article. Journalists who covered the case were fed a false account of events and reported that Israel had been offered the materials, but they were not interested. Indeed, it is more likely they purchased the blueprints and then passed them on to Mossad. So within our own country, we certainly have apartheid era mentality or economic hitmen, if you like, if you look at the words of John Perkins, certainly within our country still. So we don't know where this nuclear missile technology, etc., is, and whether or not they plan to use it and how. But certainly, given the context of what's just happened in Lebanon with the pager attack, which is, of course, terrorism against civilians, we have to ask ourselves whether our national intelligence has sat down in a meeting and said, what is the threat to South Africa, given that our country, now joined thankfully by others, had led the charge at the International Criminal Court? Have we done a security assessment? To what extent are Israeli companies involved in government services, technologies, water and electricity, our defense systems, our education systems, our banking system? I mean, you heard Netanyahu talk about, at the click of a button, taking nations down. I don't know whether this assessment has been done. Certainly after what happened in Lebanon, we would have expected there to be a high-level meeting and then a report back to the public. But that certainly has not happened. And so people legitimately have concerns about whether they're able to safely travel. And of course, raising questions around 9/11. If they could so easily do this pager attack, which apparently they've been planning for 5 to 15 years, what else is the Israeli government capable of? And of course, it's another very short clip, very disturbing, when Netanyahu says they're coming to liberate Africa. We certainly don't want any of that. We don't want them anywhere near us. But I want to close this response and this part of the conversation with you, Inayat. If we can, please play that 1-minute video showing the plan to develop a plan B for Israel in the Western Cape, in South Africa. I'll offer a brief comment and then we can move on.
What we're looking to create in the Western Cape is an ideological homeland for people who think like us, people who have broadly Western values, who want to live in the first world, and you know, want to and I've often used the example, the Western Cape becomes almost like Israel for the Jews, if I can use that example. You know, you don't have to go and live in Israel to benefit, if you're Jewish, to benefit from an Israeli state. You've got somebody who's your people, your ideological people, and they're going to have your best interests at heart. And I think it's the one place where in South Africa, current South Africa, we can create hard power. You know, we can have a police force, we can have a military, we can have borders, and actually be in a situation to influence in a really significant way at a national level the circumstances in South Africa as what currently is. Obviously we want to break South Africa up, and I think that has huge benefit to people within the Afrikaans community who are vulnerable.
Certainly terrifying times.
In fact, thank you for sharing the clip with us.
It's a plan B for Israel if things don't work out in the Middle East, which of course all racist, colonial, imperial entities must fall and will fail. But there is a plan B, and given their entrenched roots from apartheid to now, they're developing this plan at an exponential level, and we have to probably have another show on what is our response to that. But finally, let me say that the clip you screened was from African Stream. African Stream, based on allegations by the US government, apparently African Stream is funded or controlled by the Russian government, has been removed from all social media platforms and defunded as well. So the information war is as important to focus on as the weapons industrial complex.
Well, certainly, thank you for that, Shabnam. And Professor Sari, you've seen the clip as well. And it is obviously very, very clear, but also scary at the same time, where we see no nation is actually safe, including us in South Africa. Shabnam spoke about Plan A and Plan B. Plan A was Gaza. Plan B now is Lebanon. What actually lies next? Because at the end of the day, we've seen, you mentioned the Arab world, and the Palestinian Authority as well. They have been largely silent as Israel has exploited the current situation and also to seize more land. Now we hear about Israel creating a buffer zone within Lebanon as well. They spoke about a buffer zone in Gaza. Now they want to talk about a buffer zone within Lebanon as well. And just to look at it from a Lebanese perspective, how is this being perceived? How is this being looked at by the people of Lebanon?
Yeah, but thank you so much, Aina, for your question. But before, I would like really to comment what Shabnam Palesa said, and I fully agree with you, Shabnam, about your analysis. I think today the major danger of the war is really this AI and the control of telecommunications and the drones, if you like. I mean, this is drones and AI. Really, this is the new major war instrument in the 21st century. Now, we need to be careful not to make Mossad and Israel a superhero. I think they cannot do this without a complicity of United States, without complicity of France, of UK, of Germany. There is so much collaboration in the level of security apparatus, but also in the level of private sectors, in the level of Jewish diaspora, pro-Israeli diaspora worldwide, that they collaborate heavily with Israeli intelligence to make all this dirty work done by Israel if you like. Now the world is for the first time we move from monopolar regime to multipolar, where you have a China, Russia, and Iran. I can say the BRICS, where South Africa is as well. But if you like, these three countries, like they constitute another polar, and Israel is really doing this proxy war on behalf of the if you like, of the other pole. I mean the Western pole, but not only the West. And you see how in our time how vulnerable many countries. I mean, look to the vote in the last week in the UN General Assembly. We are losing African countries. Historically, they vote always with Palestine. Ethiopia abstain. I mean, Ethiopia is always doing, if you like, voting with Palestine. Now is voting, is abstaining. I will not talk about other countries next to South Africa, Malawi. I mean, they vote in favor of Israel. Some Latin American country, Paraguay, Argentina. So what I am saying, the issue at stake is more and more heavy. I mean, United States and Europe, they use carrot and the stick to force small countries to vote in their favor. But nevertheless, we have, I count the percentage, you have almost 89% of countries voted in favor of considering the West Bank and Gaza as illegally occupied territories. So the picture, the whole picture is not completely bleak. Okay, but just to say that Israel really is the outpost of this imperial power, that the neo-colonialism that they are operating. So Shabnam, Palesa, you are absolutely right. I mean, highlighting what is new in this war. Before but just to consider it as a part of a consortium and not a mono practice. Now I will come to your questions, Inayat. Lebanese population, I would say, as usual, business as usual, divided. So you have those who are unhappy about how Hezbollah, as a armed power in Lebanon, outside of the state legitimacy, and these people are really, if you like, indifferent what Israel is doing currently, as far as they don't repeat the 2006 scenarios where they destroyed Lebanese infrastructure, electricity, tunnels, bridge, and so on. And other, I would say, the biggest majority, I mean, something I consider like from 60 to 70%, they are really in their heart and in their mind with Hezbollah. Just to give you an example, my university, American University of Beirut, I saw faculties really coming from all confessions. We are trying to organize how to help the displaced people, how to open our home to them, how to give the necessary product for them. So I would say, rather, I see a manifestation of solidarity with Hezbollah. So this is, if you like, but nevertheless, I think everybody is alarmed. Everybody feel that we are going into a suspense, big suspense, whether Israel will really annihilate Lebanon, as Gallant said, whether Hezbollah will be sufficiently robust to force Israel to not to repeat Gaza scenarios in Lebanon. So if you like, this is the big questions and the big suspense that we don't know really what is next. I mean, we can see some indication. Today, there is very alarming indication that Israel is called for two brigades of reservists. They call the reservists to enter into to enroll themselves in Israeli army. This is a very bad sign, because historically, when Israel do it, it means that they will do an invasion. I see it. I observed this in the last 30 years in Palestine, and when I was living there, where I see, because it's very costly to call the reservists. So if you call the reservists, it means that you will do something. So again, I think Israel would have never done that without the green line, the complicity of the big power, whether United States or France, UK, and Germany.
Well, thank you for that, Professor Sari and Shabnam, which now brings us, which begs the question, the role of the United Nations. And Professor Sari articulated, the West, and looking at Israel and the support of countries like the United Kingdom, Germany, the United States of America, France, all of them. And these are countries that obviously hold considerable power in the United Nations as well. Now, we've seen it over and over again, even when it came to Gaza, in terms of calling for a ceasefire and an end to genocide as well. Once again, we've found that the United Nations have actually rendered itself impotent to be able to do anything. Now that the second front has been opened, now that Lebanon, and Professor Sari speaks about reservists now being called up, we know within Israel a state of emergency has been declared, and the signs are ominous of possibly a full-scale, full-blown out invasion of Lebanon as well. All of this playing out while an international body like the United Nations just sits back, watches a few statements, and that's it.
Absolutely. I would like to respond to Professor Hanafi with 2 points before responding to your question, Inayat, and that is to say, absolutely, African countries have been offered the carrot or the stick. And Israel has been working really hard on normalization and spends an enormous amount on PR and public relations and building diplomatic relations with African countries. And of course, economic ties. In 2021, trade between Israel and sub-Saharan African countries reached over $750 million, exporting machinery, electronics, and chemicals. And of course, we would remember Kenya is one of those countries that is very keen on having a relationship with the apartheid state. And of course, Kenya's President Ruto had agreed to send Kenyan troops in to Haiti, which is, of course, a deeply controversial subject. So many of our countries are still have a colonized mindset, and there's a lot of work to be done there. And of course, the Democratic Alliance, a part of the so-called Government of National Unity, was hell-bent on introducing Israeli companies' technology to solve their alleged water crisis in the Western Cape. So these tentacles extend very far and very deep. We know that Israeli companies are also entrenched in the USA's water, electricity, IT, etc. So on many levels, their government, and more importantly, their people, are captured and live in fear. When it comes to the call-up of reservists, and that's because the IDF is taking a beating, even though they'll never admit to that, by people who truly own the land. We are seeing large numbers of real Jewish people. Of course, we completely distinguish them from Zionists who are refusing to fight. And that includes the Orthodox Jews. And we're seeing an uprising of Jewish people around the world saying, not in my name. We will not be a part of this World War III, which is actually where we're at. We don't need the BBC to announce that, heaven forbid. And similarly, we are seeing the reducing number of people enrolled in the US Army. There have been at least 5 US soldiers who've self-immolated, set themselves on fire in protest against the genocide of Palestine, and no doubt we're going to see that trend continue as the genocide extends into Lebanon and perhaps other parts of the Middle East. But this is all part of the New World Order's agenda to create absolute chaos, right? Their saying is, out of chaos we shall create order. And the UN is at the center of this. So earlier on, I was in a webinar around, an event to commemorate the rising of Stephen Bantu Biko, who's certainly a South African icon. And Diana Bhutto was supposed to speak, a lawyer and an activist, but she couldn't attend because of this chaos that's happening in Palestine and Lebanon. Of course, our thoughts and our hearts are with everyone who's suffering. But I did ask a question of the other speaker, Professor Thrasher, who was there. And the question is, through its common agenda, the United Nations seeks expanded powers in the form of standing authority over 10 types of emergencies as they define them, including wars and nuclear events. Given its ongoing failures to maintain justice and peace, should the UN remain the central space for ensuring peace in the Middle East, Africa, and our world? And of course, my response is an absolute no. Professor Thrasher did talk to how the UN's become increasingly irrelevant. They're very good at wringing their hands and how heartbroken they are about what's happening in various parts of our world. He talked about BRICS, which of course the concept was invented by Goldman Sachs economists. So we must remember that. And we, the people, still don't have a seat at the table. But it certainly is an effort at creating a more multipolar, multilateral world. And he raised the global order, the global south, the global north, and what is to be done. In the 75 years of the UN's existence, the world has never known peace. So we have to ask ourselves, who funds the United Nations, and remember its actual origin. Doctors would go out of business if people were well. Big Pharma will go out of business if people didn't think they needed their drugs, right? Similarly, the UN would go out of business if the world was at peace. And if you do a little bit of digging into the UN's history, you will see alarming realities around corruption, sexual harassment, which the UN Secretary General Guterres has covered up. And I'm about to write an extensive article around the UN's failures and crimes against humanity. Is this the organization that we are relying on? Do we want to give the UN standing authority over wars, nuclear events, alleged pandemics, biological weapon threats, and an event in outer space, in other words, a false flag alien attack? That's the one world government. And while many people may see the UN as a savior and want it to save the world, it cannot. It is a playground of the parasite class. We have to decentralize. We have to build peace with each other as people, as communities, as countries, as regions, and our world. The more we depend on the United Nations, we will never see peace for Palestine, for Lebanon, for Syria, Sudan, DRC, or any part of the world. And I say this as someone who once had the ambition of becoming the Secretary General of the United Nations. And I interviewed Judge Navi Pillay around the subjects and the problems with the UN and the ICC, etc. So I would certainly say we cannot rely on the UN. It has made itself irrelevant. It is a controlled opposition. In many sense, it is false security. And we need to develop alternative ways of building peace and prosperity.
Shukran for that, Shabnam, and to bring Professor Sari back in. Prof, would you like to make any comments on what Shabnam said before we proceed?
No, I really fully agree with her. However, we need to be careful that to distinguish between, if you like, how human rights laws and the humanitarian laws manipulated by the superpower, and whether we need this, for instance, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Take it this as an icon, and always I defend that we need a humanistic language between us to be able to converse with you in South Africa, to converse with friends in Philippines, in China, in Europe, and so on. So I would not. I think we need this universality of human rights, and but in the same time, to understand how this human rights have been manipulated, weaponized against the weak. But we need this. So I'm not ready as a somebody who come from Palestine and live in Lebanon in a small countries. I'm not ready to say let's throw this this universalistic language, if you like, issued within the UN system. Actually, I know that in 1948, when there is a consensus over this Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that this have not translated by the French to not to torture systematically Algerians resistance and wage a kind of almost genocidal war on the Battle of Algiers in the late 50s and in 1960. So always I am aware that selectively, if you like, applied, but still for me it's very important, this. So do we need an alternative system? Why not? But to build on some of the positive things happened within the UN, and through all this power game and the veto system that we have it elsewhere. Just if you like, this is what the only try to bring some nuances, if you like. I am sure Shabnam agree with me on general about what this, but just I want to say this. Yeah.
If I may respond in 30 seconds, Inayat, that the principles of humanity have existed before the United Nations, and they will continue to exist after. In Africa, we refer to Ubuntu, or I am because you are, we are because of each other. But you would remember Albert Einstein said one of the signs of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different result. So if we expect the UN to be this platform or conduit for justice and peace in the world, we will never achieve it. So what I'm trying to do is perhaps plant some seeds to say there must be alternative ways of us working towards peace and prosperity. I mean, you look at the Security Council, why does it even exist? It's not even part of the Constitution. Now you have the US government saying, okay, Africa, you can have 2 seats at the table, but shut up, don't speak. In other words, no right to veto. No country there should be no Security Council. And as long as that exists, we will never see peace in our world. They talk about reform. They've just had a summit of the future where they made all of these grand plans and word salad about all the changes that they're going to make, which will of course cost all of our countries billions that we can't afford. But nothing is going to change. It still serves the parasite class, and that is my opinion.
Well, certainly, but also, Professor, one needs to understand a year later now in Gaza and also now with Lebanon. And the question is why and how did we get to this? The key issue here is to look at a leadership vacuum that exists at this point in time in dealing with the genocide, in dealing with all these atrocities on an international level. And in particular, I want to focus just for a few minutes on the Arab world and the leadership vacuum. You mentioned in Lebanon, majority of the people are obviously in support of Hezbollah. We see it right across many of the other countries. You look at Jordan, for example, there is massive support for their Palestinian cousins, their brothers and sisters. To a large extent, we've seen a lot of it subdued in countries like Saudi Arabia. We've seen even in the Gulf countries, United Arab Emirates. I mean, there the voices have been silenced. They've been subdued as well. So again, one reading into what is playing out in the Middle East and their reaction to this genocide, their reaction to the crises that have been unfolding both in Palestine and in Lebanon, tells us one thing, that we've got a huge problem. We've got a massive problem, and we have leaders that don't have the guts, they don't have the ability, or that are totally impotent in doing anything and stopping someone like Benjamin Netanyahu and this Zionist entity and this terrorist state?
Yeah, thank you for your question. If you like, if I will summarize my intellectual trajectory, I would say I grew up in Syria, where I have really two hunted by two big issues. Being Palestinian in a refugee camp, looking for emancipation from the colonial practice of Israel, but also being an authoritarian state of Syria, where I see systematic torture by Syrian regime against the opponent. So the question of democracy for me really was as central as a question of decolonization of Palestine. So based on that, I would say the big problem of the Arab world is really is authoritarianism and dictatorship that exists in many countries, and this is why I think the failure of the Arab world to constitute a major weight is that we don't work hand in hand for having a democratic regime, but in the same time, a regime of social justice that care about the other whether they are their own countries, but also the other mean the poor, the repressed around them, whether in the Arab world or beyond. So I think this is really the weakness of the Arab world. The weakness is, for instance, Morocco is completely today galvanized by what is going on Palestine. But in the same time, the Moroccan regime bought last month a satellite from Israel. It cost $1 billion. And you imagine now, Shabnam rightly talk about the Beirut problems. Imagine how many bugs is in this satellite, and this satellite will be used to spy on African countries, in particularly Algeria, I imagine, but beyond Algeria. So this is a problem that we have. The countries are very vulnerable. Even Algeria, if you like, with its dictatorship regime, is incapable of doing a muscle act against Europe, who sell arm to Israel. Europe is rely heavily on Algerian oil and gas. Algeria can play a role on really try to force the Europe to change their position, but they do nothing. Although their position is a very pro-Palestinians, I have no doubt about that. But this is the authoritarian regime is a very vulnerable regime that always thinks that if we upset so much this country or that country, we have the risk of have a headache. So this is, if you like, how I summarize the plight of the Arabs now with their leaders, including the Palestinian leadership.
Yes,
So it's not only the others. Yeah.
Yes, Shabnam, I think just a comment from your side as well, just to talk about leadership, because you've identified, obviously South Africa, we are at risk as well, and I don't think any country around the world is safe. And looking at South Africa, as Professor Sari spoke about countries like Malawi as well, and again looking at the Arab world. and you spoke about the Greater Israeli Project as well, in terms of are they in a comfort zone? Or do they believe, are they delusional in believing that they are in a comfort zone and they will not be on the receiving end of Israel and its actions, number one? But I think just before you answer the question, I see Marcy Winograd has joined us. Marcy, I think it's afternoon for you out in the United States of America. It's evening in South Africa. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be a participant on this very important show. It's 11 o'clock in California, so not quite yet the afternoon, getting there.
Well, good morning to you then. Shabnam, just quickly a comment on the Arab world and, the leadership and should they be concerned? And then we'll get to Marcy.
Absolutely. Lovely to meet you, Marcy. So absolutely, the Arab world, I mean, it's not even a homogenous term, is it? Very much captured by the carrot or the stick and compartmentalizing human rights from economic needs and interests. And where you have puppets that have been installed by imperialism and corporate colonialism, we're always going to be faced with this problem. And I would turn, if I want to talk about leadership, I will talk about President Ibrahim Traore from Burkina Faso, who is doing brilliant work in the Sahel region and formed this confederation with Mali and Niger and Senegal and growing, where he essentially told the French corporations that are exploiting African resources to leave. You will trade on our terms or we will not trade with you. You have electricity, we have poverty. And I think Arab leaders and other leaders around the world should learn from this president and similarly say to corporations who are at the root of much of the evil in our world, that if you are exploiting and oppressing us, we're not doing business with you. Leave our countries and find ways to trade with each other on more equitable terms. But unfortunately, due to conflicts of interest, which is a favorite subject of mine, these leaders are compromised through economic interests, and we have to therefore use the power of economic boycott, including against British Petroleum, which is after Gaza's gas, and Chevron. Economic boycott, as we know, is very effective. We saw that for South Africa.
Thank you for that, Shabnam. Marcy, welcome once again, and we do appreciate you taking time out. And clearly, Marcy, we are talking about this second round or the second country that has come under attack from Israel as well. We're talking about Lebanon and what has been playing out as well. Israel, obviously acting with impunity, but also with support of the countries like the United States of America. We see the term genocide Joe that has, or the label that has been attached to Joe Biden. We know he's no longer running for elections for the presidency. But at the end of the day, again, as Professor Sari Hanafi also mentioned, talking about this proxy war that is taking place in the Middle East. Israel, obviously, fighting this war on behalf of a greater agenda that is playing out. The United States of America, Western nations as well. And just to take your take, Marcy, on what is happening. And now that we are almost a year down the line with this genocide that is unfolding in Gaza.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you again for inviting me on the show. Great to be with all of you. And much love to South Africa for doing what this country, South Africa, can do to stop the genocide, going to the International Court of Justice and so forth. And Code Pink has been an avid supporter of South Africa's for a long time, and we really are grateful for your efforts. What I think is happening is that the United States, as you mentioned, has given permission to Israel to go full force in Lebanon. It's a horror show. It's tragic. Those of us, many of us, who have been in the street, who have been in our Congress members' offices, who have camped out at universities, passed resolutions, are really horrified by what we see our government doing in our name with our tax dollars, billions of dollars in weapons transports to Israel for this genocide in Gaza, and now what's going to happen to Lebanon. You know, we are grateful to South Africa. We are grateful to all of those around the world who are marching and standing up and doing more to try to stop this genocide that's now threatening to engulf more of the Middle East, certainly Lebanon. And unfortunately, in the United States, I'm not really clear on the political calculus that the Harris campaign has made. Kamala Harris, she is the candidate for the Democratic Party running for president. President Biden, after he performed disastrously at the first debate, eventually bowed out under great pressure from his party, and his vice president, Kamala Harris, is now running for president. She is supposedly ahead in the national polls, but that's rather meaningless. I don't know exactly where she stands right this minute in the what they call the battleground states. There are probably about 7 states that are really going to decide this election. And clearly Pennsylvania is one of them with 19 electoral votes, Michigan another with 15 electoral votes. And Harris, I think she took the wind out of a lot of us when she said at the Democratic National Convention, the presidential nominating convention, and during the debate with former President Trump, that she was all in for arming Israel, she stood by Israel in its wars in the Middle East, and that the United States would deliver the most lethal force ever if needed in the world. These were words guaranteed to curry favor with the neocons, the national security state. Many of these representatives, the Republicans, have come out in support of Kamala Harris because she is a safe bet, really, to continue the hegemonic powers of the U.S. empire, unless, there's just even more and more pushback. But she's taking a gamble. She's taking a real gamble because we know that Michigan, 100,000 voters in Michigan with its 15 electoral votes, voted uncommitted. Those were Democrats who voted in the primary campaign that they would not commit to Kamala Harris or to Biden because of the continuance of this murderous policy. And so she is willing to gamble Michigan for Pennsylvania, apparently.
Marcy, just while you are talking about the United States and the elections, the upcoming elections that are taking place. Now, from the visuals that we've been seeing, both Kamala Harris and also Donald Trump trying to win the hearts and the minds of ordinary Americans. We've seen visuals of Kamala Harris dancing with people on the street, Donald Trump going into supermarkets, buying groceries for people, just looking at what has, and we were expecting at some point in time that the outcome of the elections obviously would feature a lot on U.S. foreign policy, particularly what has been playing out in Gaza, the genocide, the American position. Now that it's getting even closer to the elections, we see Lebanon as well. Is American foreign policy, is Gaza, is what is playing out in Lebanon still an issue? Or are both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, both the Democrats and the Republicans, just focused on issues on winning the hearts and minds of ordinary people in the United States?
That's a great question. I don't know that we will have the answer to that until the votes are tallied. Gaza, Lebanon, the U.S. Foreign wars are certainly an issue for many of us. The number one issue, according to the polls, is the economy, stemming the rising tide of inflation. And I think, if Kamala Harris wants to win Michigan, she needs to come out in support of a more, what shall we say, cautious U.S. foreign policy. I don't know that she's willing to buck President Biden, whose support she very much wants as she campaigns across the United States. And he's been a loyal client, shall we say, of the state of Israel. But she needs to say something more than we're working hard for a ceasefire, because who believes that? And I think we really need, as Democrats, as Greens, as Republicans, U.S. taxpayers need to tie the economy to these foreign wars that are crippling us, really making us, creating great resentment toward the United States and Israel, and also contributing so much to our debt and to our inflationary cycle. And I just want to say at Code Pink.
Well, thank you for that. I see Shabnam has actually just put on a. Sorry, Marcy. Shabnam has just put on a quick question on the screen here. What about Jill Stein as president?
Yeah, what about, well, a lot of people on the left, people want to see an end to the genocide in Gaza, a wider war, including Lebanon, Syria. Oh my gosh, God forbid Iran, will be voting for Jill Stein. And apparently the polls say she has a majority of the Muslim votes in some of these swing states, but she's not on the ballot in every state. And the Democrats have been trying very hard to keep her off the ballot, suing her right and left. Mostly right. Her campaign says she could still win. She could still, even though she is not on the ballot in every state, that the math works that she could still win. But it's very hard to imagine, given the fact that we don't have one Green Party representative elected to federal office that I'm aware of. But, anything can happen. There's no law of gravity that says she can't win.
Well, thank you for that. Shabnam, again, just coming back to what Marcy is saying, and I know that we've somewhat switched focus to the United States of America, to the elections, but it is a major issue. It has been a major issue in many a country where elections have been held. We've seen it here in South Africa as well, where Palestine was at the forefront of many a campaign in the build-up to our very own national elections. The key issue here, again, and as Marcy speaks about, she says, people concerned about the economy, how it impacts them on a day-to-day basis. How are they going to pay their bills? Where is their food going to come from? How are they going to pay their mortgages? Where they're going to get electricity from. But again, you mentioned right up front, you spoke about economic interests in terms of Israel and the wider economic interests as far as its aggression in the Middle East goes. And again, coming back to what Marcy is saying, there is a huge cost. The cost of the United States of America supplying weapons to a country like Israel at the cost of ordinary people, at the cost of their livelihoods, at the cost of their families. All of this put together tells us that at the end of the day, Israel will leverage from a country like the United States of America through its supply of weapons and whatever it can actually grab and get hold of to further its own agenda in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to tell which is the dog and which is the tail between the US government and the Israeli government. And I want to be very clear in saying that people are not their governments and governments are not their people. And that's why we're seeing some of the biggest protests since Vietnam and the protests against the war in Iraq based on lies, weapons of mass destruction. And Netanyahu was involved there as well. He came and lied to the US Congress. And here he's back a couple of months ago getting 51 standing ovations for doing what? Leeching the American economy, where there is a shrinking middle class. The poor, they have absolutely no hope. Students are heavily in debt, so much so that they'll never be out of debt to the mafia-like banks in the US and around the world. The healthcare system is suffering. Crime is out of control. People are turning to the opioid crisis and becoming customers of the big pharma and the antidepressant industry in an effort to try and remain sane amongst all the madness. And all these arguments have been made very articulately by the students themselves at the various encampments, by the trade unions in the US and of course around the world. And still, the government does not listen. And that is because governments are the managing agents of the parasite class. And if we think about the world in that way, suddenly it all makes sense. And one example of that is this revolving lobby between AIPAC and politicians who hold positions of authority. They're so well funded in the US and around the world that they will almost inevitably take an irrational decision and make the most heinous statements in defense of the indefensible. I mean, Blinken, for example, has just been accused of lying to Congress over Gaza aid. He's facing calls for his resignation over allegations that he lied to Congress about Israeli forces blocking US aid for Gaza, despite even Americans themselves being killed in Palestine. Aisha Noor, Shireen Abu Akleh, etc. It's also very clear that Israel exercises its skill in the area of blackmail over US politicians, which draws into question the Epstein files. what information did Epstein have on these various US politicians? Is that why they behave the way that they do? Certainly, there are exceptions. Jill Stein, Cornel West, Thomas Nassie, I don't know why he's not running for president, etc. But I think this experience with Palestine has really opened up the eyes of ordinary Americans who are the real people, just like us, who can help bring peace around our world. But it's going to take an enormous amount of consistent work in protests, in online activism, in grassroots activism, in using academic, cultural, and economic boycotts. And certainly we stand with you. I certainly think your political system, Marcy, like ours, makes no sense. And all of it needs to change. There has to be, at the center of any democracy, must be public participation. Until we have that, it's going to be more of the same. But as we know, power of the people is stronger than people in power.
That is right. And Code Pink is
clearly, Shabnam,
up there in the street. I just wanted to second those thoughts and say that Code Pink very much believes in people power, and we are involved in planning protests as we approach October 7th, and on October 7th, calling for an arms embargo, a U.S. arms embargo on Israel. We're, supporting and organizing protests around the country. We think that this will be a time when the media will be focused on this issue, when in some ways it's receding into the background.
Yes, Marcy, in fact, you actually took my question out of my mouth with regard to October 7th, because this is where I was actually headed for as well. 1 year anniversary for this genocide in Gaza as well. And I'm sure that there will be a lot of activities that will be planned in the United States, but right across the entire world. But, just looking at the possibility of this being overshadowed by the elections that are taking place, because we know people like Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are obviously stealing the limelight. And, as Shabnam also spoke about, Blinken accused of lying to Congress as well in terms of accountability. Just as far as the media is concerned, and I'd like to talk about the media, the media looking at Gaza, looking at Palestine a year later, the genocide, are we likely to see corporate media? Are we likely to see mainstream media focus, or the focus is going to be more on the elections and the outcome of the United States elections?
With Israel's latest terrorist attacks on Lebanon, the issue of Israel, Gaza, Lebanon, the Middle East has come to the fore again. It was receding. The election, of course, is stealing the show, and we get blow by blow of money, who's contributed what, who's campaigning where, when there's really not a whole lot of difference between the two on U.S. foreign policy. I certainly didn't hear, the one issue that has come to the fore between Trump and Kamala Harris is the issue of the Ukraine, the war between Ukraine and Russia. The U.S. has spent about upwards of $200 billion of taxpayer money to arm Ukraine in what really began as a civil war before the Russian invasion. And so at Code Pink, we see the United States involved in two proxy wars, one in Ukraine, the other now in Lebanon, but also Palestine. And we say no to all of these proxy wars. We must press forward on diplomacy.
Thank you for that, Marcy. Shabnam, we are obviously, we've got about 5 or 6 minutes. In fact, I'm just looking at Shabnam. I'm not too sure if Shabnam is around to just get back on screen.
I'm here.
But just to look ahead. Oh, there we go, Shabnam. Okay. Just to look forward and ahead. And again, we know in South Africa, obviously, something huge is going to happen as far as October 7th is concerned. There are going to be many activities right across the entire country. But again, as Marcy says, that, there are times when things obviously go quiet and then suddenly something big happens, like we see what has taken place in Lebanon right now. And suddenly, everybody is woken up. And while all of this is playing out, we've seen 90% of the people of Gaza cramped in 10% of the land in Gaza. We've seen the horrific images still come through I think it's just the tip of the iceberg. At Salam Media, we had the pleasure of having internationally renowned Yumna Al-Said in South Africa. We toured with Yumna Al-Said and we got a deeper insight into the horrors. And it's scary that there is just very little that we really know, because a lot of it remains still hidden. And it's people like Yumna Al-Said who come out, who have been brave enough to actually speak out and to highlight some of the detail behind these horrors, that we appreciate, what the people of Palestine are going through. And again, there are concerns that possibly Lebanon or parts of Lebanon could turn out to be another Gaza genocide.
Well, what Israel and its accomplices show us is that what they're doing in Gaza, they're capable of doing in Lebanon and in any other part of the world. They're aiming to turn Gaza, if it remains as a 15-minute city, part of the UN's agenda and the New World Order's blueprint. So we have to not only pay careful attention to the underlying agenda, but we have to show complete solidarity with the oppressed people of our world. And we famously know Nelson Mandela, who said, South Africa is not free until Palestine is free. But that has to see itself out in tangible actions. So for me, I plan to direct people to my article called Wage Peace, which you can find on my Substack, and ask people to contribute ideas. How can we wage peace actively as the 99%? And that means speaking truth to power. It means standing up for the oppressed, and it means building a better world together. Secondly, I'm about to release an interview I've done with Vera Sharav, who is a Holocaust survivor, an author, a filmmaker, an activist. And we talk about parallels between the tyranny of COVID-19 and the tyranny of wars that we are seeing. Of course, the parasite class has many weapons in which to encroach upon our freedoms. And she's very clear that what is happening to Palestinians now is worse than what happened to the Jews of the 1930s and 40s. It's a very powerful statement to make. And she also, of course, clearly delineates Zionism from Judaism. And so these voices that are coming through increasingly are a tsunami that cannot be stopped. And ultimately, good will triumph, because an injury to one is an injury to all. Free Palestine, free Lebanon, free Africa, free the US from AIPAC, and free the world.
Hear, hear, yes. And I would just
Shukran for that, Shabnam. Marcy, final words from you.
Sure. I just want to invite everybody to visit our website, codepink.org. Also, our webpage, boughtbyzionism.org, which details the money that has been pouring into members of Congress, to think tanks, to charities, to carry water for the terror state of Israel. We are very much believers in mass action and mobilization. So check it out. We have an events calendar, and we want to be out there and supporting our students. To a large extent, they are in the vanguard. Students at the universities, we saw all these encampments and the crackdowns. And I think some of this activism will resume as students return, for example, to the University of California. I also want to say that to a large extent, the power is in the states. I live in California, where we have a Zionist caucus pushing all sorts of repressive legislation to silence the voices of dissent, because that's, I guess, the only way they think they can win, is to shut everybody up. But the truth is out. People are witnessing this genocide in real time. And so, as discouraging as it can be, we have to say, look, Saudi Arabia is not going to normalize relations with Israel until it recognizes a Palestinian state. We have to recognize that Reuters is reporting Germany has stopped sending weapons, stopped approving weapons to Israel. We have to recognize that Canada is withholding some of the weapons too. So, and that AXA, the big insurance company, recently announced it was divesting from Israel. There are victories along the way. It's not going to happen fast. I wish it would, but we have to keep on. Power to the people.
Oh, we certainly will. Shukran for that to Marcy Winograd, and also to you, Shabnam, Palesa, Mohamed. It's been an absolute pleasure having all of you, and also Professor Professor Safi Hanafi, who unfortunately had to leave us. But we thank you. We do appreciate your time with us right here on Salam Media. All the best to both of you. Please take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. Love to Salam Media, South Africa.
Assalamu alaikum.
That was Marcy Winograd and also Shabnam Palesa Mohamed, Professor Sani Hanafi with us on the discussion. And that was just part of the discussion that we had this evening right here on Salam Media. We still have got one more issue to come. We want to talk about the execution of Imam Marcellus Khalifa Williams in the United States of America. We will be joined in the company of Al-Hajj Maurice Salah Khan and also Edward Ahmed Mitchell out of the United States of America, together with Dr. Abdul Wahid from the United Kingdom, social commentator. And this is obviously a story that has broken out in terms of the execution of Imam Marcellus Khalifa. And we've just been reminded, of his death, what has happened, and his final will or his final thoughts that he had actually penned. And this clearly is very, very emotional in terms of what has actually happened to Imam Khalifa. The time is just gone, 2025. We're going to go for a quick break. Stay with us, and we'll be with you right until 9 p.m. tonight.